Can Arizona make a run? Did the men's committee do a good job? And my hottest of hot takes, but it involves music and not sports. You're listening to the Wildcat Sports Report podcast. The brackets are out, and all eyes are now on the Wildcat women's basketball team. The men's season is done, of course, and the women, had a better season and deserve the attention of the U of A basketball world. And if you look at it, Arizona was done some favors by the committee and then done some disservices by the committee, if you will. Although when you're losers of 3 out of 4, it's hard to really take offense. Arizona, the number 3 seed in what's called the Mercado region, which all games being played in the San Antonio area. Arizona, number 3. Number 1 is North Carolina State. Number 2, Texas A&M. Although the committee considers NC State the third best of the number 1 seeds. Most of the experts that I read felt that they were 4th best of the number 1s and that Texas A&M was actually more deserving of the 1 seed had they won one more game in the SEC tournament. In fact, we're kind of looking at a situation where if Arizona doesn't lose to ASU or beats UCLA and goes to the finals of the Pac-12 tournament, they're possibly a 2. If Texas A&M goes to the finals of the SEC tournament, they're possibly a number 1. And if NC State didn't win their tournament in the ACC, they're probably dropping down to a 2. So really, this whole thing is jumbled by about 1 game each. And what we can see is that the committee seems to put a lot of weight into the conference tournaments. Oddly enough, the committee actually rated Texas A&M as the number 6 team, although a lot of people feel that they're maybe the 3rd best team in the country right now. Arizona does limp into the tournament, losing 3 of 4, with 5 total losses, and all of those, except for the loss to ASU, came against NCAA tournament teams, with 2 against 1 seed Stanford and 1 to number 3 seeded UCLA. Arizona opens up against a solid Stony Brook program, but they're a typical 14-type seed. They've got some athletic guards, but if we learned anything this season is that the Cats' athleticism gives inferior team fits, and Stony Brook's got a small backcourt that could really struggle against Arizona's bigger players. Although Stony Brook, a very solid team, has won a lot of games, Arizona just appears on paper to be better, and again, with the exception of ASU, which is still a decent ball club, Arizona kind of punishes inferior teams. It's when they get against equal to or superior teams that they kind of struggle. The second round is where it gets interesting. They got a BYU team potentially that was the last at-large team to get in and really haven't beaten anyone save for Gonzaga and a really iffy LSU team. The most glaring thing I get for BYU is that they were blown out by a 7-win Washington team that just isn't very good. It's more likely that the Wildcats will face Rutgers. Scarlet Knights are a really good athletic team, but have only played 18 games thanks to a lengthy COVID pause. 3 of their 4 losses were to NCAA tournament teams. They can score. They're very athletic. They can score. But against their type of press, Arizona's athletic guards could kind of feast on it a little bit. They do give up a lot of fast breaks. They give up a lot of transition threes. So Ari McDonald especially could kind of feast on the press if Arizona can figure out how to break it. Arizona should get to the Sweet 16. Obviously, no guarantee, especially the way Arizona is struggling to score right now. But they should, barring just kind of an utter collapse, get to the Sweet 16. That's where it gets really tough. Because barring a huge upset, Texas A&M should hold serve. Again, the Aggies are good enough to win it all, frankly. They're at least very good enough to be a Final Four caliber team. And there's really a real chance, in my opinion, that if the 2 teams meet, Arizona and Texas A&M, in the 3rd round, in the Sweet 16, that the winner could be the one to advance to the Final Four out of this region. Now, there are no guarantees of that. Obviously, NC State, a very good team as well, but maybe not quite as good as you would think with the 1 seed. Really, the key, though, becomes, 1, can Ari McDonald dominate, take over games, especially against some of these better teams? You know, obviously, when you're playing a Stony Brook, Arizona's going to have 5 of the top 7 players in the game, at least. You know, even when you get against a Rutgers or a BYU, Arizona's got more good players. But then when you get A&M, when you get NC State, even if you were to get, the 4 seed from the top of the bracket, things get a lot more even. And that's where Arizona has struggled a bit, especially when their shooting kind of gets away from them. Now, if they can dominate in the middle, if Kate Reese can go off and be that number 2 scoring threat, the bigs can dominate in the post. Again, if McDonald can go off, if some of the other role scorers can contribute and shoot at a high percentage, then Arizona becomes very tough to beat. What worries me is in games against Stanford, even in that Pac-12 tournament game against UCLA, late in games against similar or superior athletic teams, Arizona did tend to struggle and really struggled to find their shot. You saw McDonald having to kind of drive crazily into the lane as opposed to getting those nice pathways in the lane. Had to take off balance shots, had to take deep threes. And if Arizona has to rely on kind of some hero ball from McDonald, although she's certainly capable of taking over a game, just look at what she did against ASU, for example. But you also saw that at the end of the day, the Wildcats came up short. So that's my concern. But I like the path. Again, there's no guarantees that if they get by Texas A&M, they can beat or they will beat NC State, but they can. Because again, in just doing my research, and again, I'm not going to pretend that I'm this women's college basketball expert, but in reading and talking and looking things up, it really sounds like most people believe Texas A&M is the better squad than NC State. So if Arizona can get by them, and again, it's not an easy path, but it would be an easier path than if you had to go through a UConn, or if you had to go through Stanford again. So I think that gives Arizona kind of a benefit there that they avoided one of those 2 regions. Really, the thing that makes you feel bad for the Wildcats is the fact they're not going to get to host. Being a 3 seed, they would have gotten to host the first-round game at McHale, and if that NIT run a couple years ago is any indication, you're probably talking about sellouts. They were packing 10 to 12,000 at the end of the NIT. You can only imagine that they'd go the full 14 plus and pack McHale with what would be a really fantastic atmosphere for the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament. Alas, they don't get that. They're going to be playing in their friends and family in San Antonio. But in a weird way, that actually does help them as well, because while you're playing Texas A&M only a few hours from their campus, it's not like they're going to truck in a ton of fans. So in a weird way, while it hurts you for those first 2 rounds, it may help Arizona as you get into the Sweet 16 and hopefully the Elite 8 and further. The men's tournament, well, there's no Arizona men's team in it. But overall, I like the brackets. I like what the NCAA tournament did. Really, only a few glaring things to me. One is I think the misseeding of Oklahoma State. I think Oklahoma State probably deserved a 3. I think that if you look, the committee maybe gave a little too much weight to the Big Ten, although the Big Ten is a fantastic conference. When you see 8, 9-loss teams still getting 2 seeds, it's a little bit of a concern. But on the other hand, who would you replace them with? This has been such a weird year in college basketball. The measuring stick, if you look at the eyeball test, teams like Iowa, teams like Ohio State look really good. So I can understand that using that eyeball test and not just the metrics can make a team that maybe has a loss or 2 more than you would like to see in years past get the edge. I've seen a lot of debate about whether Arizona would have gotten in, and they certainly have the good net rating, but I think at the end of the day, they would have been on the outside looking in. Now, that's hard to say because you obviously would have had the Pac-12 tournament. If Arizona can pick up a couple wins there, I don't even think they had to win it, then maybe. If you get another win over UCLA, if you would have gotten another win over, if you actually just would have gone the path that Oregon State went, and even if you lost to Colorado in the finals, but getting a few of those wins, because if you remember, Oregon State took Arizona's spot in the bracket because Arizona's self-imposed penalties. That said, at the end of the day, although Arizona really lacked the quality wins, save for that win over Colorado and a win over USC. And if you look at where the committee ranked UCLA, being one of the final 4 teams in and having to play in the play-in game, it's hard to imagine that an Arizona team that couldn't beat UCLA would have gotten the nod over the Bruins, although the Bruins limped to the finish. Arizona kind of did as well. But it's a moot point. Arizona not in. The rest of the job, I think, by the committee was pretty good. I like the fact that they put Drake in. I like the fact that they put Wichita State in. Now, I made a comment on Twitter that was a little bit controversial, and I said, as a fan, as a viewer, I would have much preferred to see a 26-4 Belmont team. I would have much rather have seen a 20-4 Southern Utah team than, say, 15-10 Oklahoma. Say whatever it was, I think it was something in 9, something in 10 Rutgers. Rutgers is essentially in the tournament because they played a really tough schedule and they got 2 really good wins back in November or December. They haven't beaten anyone of note in 2021. That being said, I don't necessarily believe that those teams, and in fact I don't believe Belmont did enough, even though they are tied with Gonzaga for the number of wins in the country. They haven't beaten anyone. And in fact, they had a chance to go to the tournament and they lost to Morehead State by 15 in their conference tournament. In the exact same boat at 20-4, but when you have a 25-point loss to Weber State and you've also lost at LMU, you don't deserve to be in. So while from a viewing standpoint, I'd love to see how Belmont matches up as a 13 or 14. I'd love to see how Southern Utah matches up. Really, I don't think they deserve to be in. Now, I'm glad they went some of these smaller schools, non-Power 5 schools, over kind of a pedestrian Louisville team, kind of a pedestrian Ole Miss team. Really, if you're looking at the team that kind of got left out, it's St. Louis. St. Louis's net ranking is really high. But their problem is they only played like 15 games. So while you could say, well, they're a 4-loss team and their net's really good, they don't have the body of work. What would have happened if they played 8 more games, 9 more games? So while, again, I'd like to, as a viewer, as a fan who really likes, especially at the lower end of the at-larges, seeing more of these smaller teams try to beat the bigger teams, I can totally understand where the committee came from, and at the end of the day, using the what they're like to look at, strength of schedule, quality wins, lack of bad losses, teams like Rutgers and teams like Michigan State and teams like UCLA and teams like Oklahoma are the ones that deserve it. And so I really don't have any problems, and I actually thought they seeded it pretty well. It looks like a pretty balanced bracket. I think at the end of the day, Gonzaga looks head and shoulders above everyone else. Baylor's kind of right there. Really like what Illinois is doing at the end of the season. I'd be hard-pressed to bet against them. But you didn't come here for my bracket picks, and if you did, maybe the thing I don't like the most, and has nothing to do with the committee, is the adoration being heaped upon Rick Pitino. And from a coaching standpoint, Pitino's arguably one of the 3 or 4, not only best coaches of college basketball now, but of all time. Other than a Wooden and a Coach K, I'm hard-pressed to find someone who has done what Rick Pitino has done. My problem is the national media just ignoring the fact that, yes, he's taken his 5th different team to the NCAA tournament, but the reason he's not at Louisville, the reason he had to go to Greece and he's now at Iona is, he was caught up in these scandals. Both the FBI probe mentioned Louisville, but more importantly, the whole scandal about the assistant coaches hiring strippers and escorts for athletes and having them perform, shall we say, in the basketball dormitory. And while a lot of people, and rightfully so, say Sean Miller should have known what his assistants were doing, they seem to give Rick Pitino a pass. Like, well, how is Rick Pitino supposed to know they're hiring strippers to go to the basketball dorm? Well, I think it's much more logical that the coach would know that on the school expenses, that they're hiring escorts, hiring strippers to go to the basketball dormitory, not just some random apartment off campus, the basketball dormitory, than it is that Book Richardson was halfway across the country taking some kickback bribes. Now, again, should Miller have known? Absolutely. I'm not making an excuse. But the fact is, every time we see Arizona, where we have Dick Vitale or Jay Billis or whoever mentioning Miller, and it's fair. Miller is guilty of what they say he's guilty of, or if the rest of the program's guilty under his watch, he deserves criticism. But the fact is, I don't see Andy Enfield getting blasted. I don't see Oklahoma State getting blasted. I don't see other schools getting blasted. The fact of the matter is, I guess because you have Cade Cunningham or you have Evan Mobley, we're just going to kind of ignore it. We're just going to kind of ignore that, Memphis underachieves, and that, before he became coach of Memphis, he gave James Weissman $15,000 to move to Memphis, and then later recruited him to Memphis. Again, my thing is, and this is true across things, politics, entertainment, just be consistent. If you're going to criticize Miller, and you have every right to criticize Miller, you better be criticizing Andy Enfield, and you better be criticizing Bruce Pearl, and you better be criticizing Rick Pitino and other coaches. You better be, where's the comments about Bill Self? Why are we not talking more about Zion and just all of that? Again, not defending Miller per se, But I do think that somehow he and to a lesser extent, Will Wade get a far worse rap than maybe they deserve when compared to other coaches out there. One of the loyal listeners, Prince of the East Side, asked me for some music takes. He wanted to ask me whether I thought Guns N' Roses deserved to be on the Mount Rushmore. He didn't specify the rock and roll Mount Rushmore or the heavy metal Mount Rushmore. And then asked me if Ministry was a top 5 metal band. And I said kind of no to both, but it got me thinking. And let me backtrack a little bit. Love Guns N' Roses. Appetite for Destruction is one of the 10 best albums, regardless of genre, of all time. But unfortunately for them, their body of work really included one amazing album, one really good EP. We're gonna ignore the independent release, Live Like a Suicide, and then a bloated but very solid, double album that probably could have been one spectacular single album, and then the covers album. And that's about it. I'm not counting the album that came out in the early 2000s that was really an Axl Rose solo project, and we don't know what's going to happen. But to me, the body of work is too small, no matter what the impact was. Although I think you could seriously consider them. But it got me really thinking about, what is the heavy metal Mount Rushmore? What 4 bands deserve to be on it? And I thought the first 3 were pretty easy. And again, we're doing heavy metal. We're not doing bands that influenced heavy metal or bands that were kind of a sort of heavy. So no Led Zeppelin. Although their impact on the genre, it goes without saying. A band like Van Halen, to me, not quite heavy metal. They're a hard rock band. And even AC/DC. And AC/DC was a band I thought long and hard about. But to me, they're a hard rock band. They're not a heavy metal band. And again, if we're quibbling here, and if so, if you think AC/DC is a heavy metal band, then they're probably number 4. But number 1 was easier, Black Sabbath, first heavy metal band of all time. They begat Ozzy. They begat everything. I mean, really, although some would argue there were bands before them that were just as heavy, Black Sabbath is the template that heavy metal came from. Number 2 is Metallica. Metallica, the biggest extreme metal band, but being a thrash band, but just what they have done and the quality of their output. Even if you don't like the sound change of the 90s and early 2000s, you can't deny what the Black Album meant to heavy metal and to music in general. Still one of the highest selling albums of all time. Can't deny what Load and Reload were, although I think they got away from the sound. I'm a first 3-4 album guy myself, and their run has been remarkable. They're still innovating. They're still selling out. Doing these virtual tours now during COVID. So they're number 2. Number 3 got a little dicier, a little trickier, but I would go with Iron Maiden. I think it had to be a traditional heavy metal band. I thought it was either Iron Maiden or it was Judas Priest. And I just think I like Maiden better for one thing. And I think Maiden's overall body of work is just a little more consistent. And they're more relevant now. They're still selling out bigger venues than Judas Priest are. Especially internationally, where they're, again, I think I've mentioned this a few times, soccer stadiums. So who's number 4? And if you look at the actual Mount Rushmore, you've got the 3 big-time presidents. You got Washington, you got Jefferson, you got Lincoln, and then you got Teddy Roosevelt. You got a little bit of an outlier there. And if you're going to go by those rules, then there's a band that a lot of you may not have heard of called Death. They were a Florida band that they actually named the genre death metal after, and they were really the first extreme metal band, or one of them, and really created a variety of genres stemming from their music. It was faster, it was louder, it was more guttural. It makes Metallica sound like polished pop, to be honest. And without Death, there's no death metal, there's probably no black metal, no extreme metal. But if we're going with the typical Mount Rushmore summer in July, dog days of sports talk radio, of the top 4 of each genre, then I think it gets, in a weird way, even tougher. So it kind of decided that, you could go with a couple genres. Could you go with the new metal movement of the, late 90s, early 2000s? Do you go with kind of the groove metal movement? Again, don't consider Nirvana metal. Don't consider Alice in Chains metal, so they're kind of out. Or do you go with the hair metal of the 80s? And I lean that way. I think you could have gone with Slayer, who, again, more of a thrash band. But at the end of the day, I don't think you can put the number 2 thrash band, maybe number 3 behind Megadeth, because you got Metallica. I thought of Motley Crue. Again, a long, storied career, but in essence, really 3 really strong albums, and then kind of petered off, and have just kept everything alive, though. thought about who got lumped in the hair metal, like a Bon Jovi. But to me, Bon Jovi just really is a hard rock band that kind of dressed up like a metal band. And this one is borderline as well, because they wouldn't refer to themselves as a heavy metal band. But I think it's got to be Def Leppard. And at the end of the day, I think if you especially listen to the early albums, they're a metal band. They're not a heavy metal band, but they're a metal band. Listen to High and Dry, listen to On Through the Night, listen to Pyromania. Now you get into Hysteria, it gets very poppy. I get it. But you look at the album sales of Pyromania and Hysteria, and they're among the biggest all-time in any kind of music, especially heavy metal. You look at the influence I think Pyromania had, both on the hair metal scene and really just the hard rock scene as well. You look at their relevance. They were still playing arenas, albeit smaller arenas, into the 2000s. Now, again, also in the late 90s, I think they played the bowling alley off of Ina Road, because I was playing a softball game and could hear their sound check at Sports Park. And then they did a residency in Vegas, which is about the most unmetal thing you can do. So while I think you can easily go with a band like Slayer, I think you could go with a band like Slipknot. You could go with a band, even as much as I don't really like them, a Five Finger Death Punch, because of their modern influence. I think at the end of the day, I'm going with Def Leppard as my fourth on the Mount Rushmore. A lot of bad father things, but I'm going to save those for another time. I think we can still got to recap the men's basketball season. We got to do a spring preview. Spring football is coming up, and Jed Fish confirmed today at Arizona's Pro Day that they're going to allow fans, a limited number, but fans and media with full access, which is really cool. So you should get a lot of good content from all the great media outlets here in town. So a lot of exciting things there. I guess the last bit of news, Terrell Brown has announced that he's entered the transfer portal. Of course, he transferred to Arizona, taking advantage of the bonus COVID year. There is still some speculation he could end up coming back. Some speculation he may just try to play pro overseas, or may just go look for a place where he can really become a more focal point of the offense. He came to Arizona, I think, knowing he wouldn't get as many shots as he got at Seattle. I think maybe he took a lesser role than he thought overall he would get. And that was, I think, a disappointment to him a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see. My guess is we will not see Terrell Brown, who will join fellow senior Ira Lee, not playing for Arizona next year. But there's, again, always a chance he could indeed come back. And then I guess are we on Archie Miller watch? Miller let go by Indiana. Will he be welcome back to the fold at Arizona, who is not expected to lose any assistance? Would Arizona shuffle someone around? I don't know. But I think you can argue that some of Arizona's best teams had Archie Miller helping out his brother on the bench. So it comes down to it. On Monday, Arizona women taking on Stony Brook. Their first appearance in over 15 years in the NCAA tournament. Dia Barnes gets a chance now to write her next chapter of her already pretty storied Arizona coaching career. We'll be watching. I think you'll be watching. And so to all of you and to the women's basketball team, bear down.